What does it mean to lose everything you thought you knew in a single moment? For Clara, that question wasn't just a fleeting thought, it was the weight of her world collapsing on a rain-soaked evening in October. The call came at 2:17 a.m., the kind of call that splits your life into before and after. Her parents, the ones who'd raised her with laughter and late-night talks over tea, were gone. A truck driver, exhausted and reckless, had veered into their lane on the highway. The police officer's voice was clinical, detached, as he described the wreckage. Clara's hands trembled as she hung up, the phone slipping from her grip onto the cold kitchen floor. She turned to David, her husband of 5 years, expecting comfort, a shared grief. Instead, he looked at her with eyes like steel and said, "Good." They were just a burden. The words hit harder than the news of the crash. Clara stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. David didn't flinch. He turned back to his laptop, the blue glow illuminating his sharp features as if nothing had happened. A burden? Her parents? The people who had welcomed him into their home, cooked him meals, and treated him like a son? Clara's mind reeled, replaying every moment of their marriage, searching for cracks she'd ignored. Had he always been this cold, or had she been too blind to see it? The days that followed were a blur of funeral arrangements and condolences from neighbors. Clara moved through it all like a ghost, her heart hollowed out by loss and betrayal. Her parents' house, once filled with the smell of her mother's jasmine tea and her father's old jazz records, now felt like a museum of memories. She sorted through their belongings, her mother's recipe cards, her father's worn-out gardening gloves, each item a stab of grief. David, meanwhile, was absent, claiming work demanded his attention. "You'll be fine," he'd said, leaving her to face the emptiness alone. Clara tried to bury her pain in the logistics, but David's words echoed in her mind. She remembered how he'd roll his eyes when her parents called, how he'd complain about their visits. "They're clingy," he'd say. "They're holding you back." She'd brushed it off as stress, convinced herself he didn't mean it. But now, with their absence carving a void in her chest, she saw the truth. David had never loved them. Maybe he'd never loved her either. One evening, as Clara sat alone in her parents' living room, a knock at the door startled her. It was Mrs. Ellis, the elderly woman from across the street. Her white hair was pulled into a neat bun, and her eyes carried a quiet understanding. "I brought you some soup," she said, holding out a warm container. "And something else." She hesitated, then handed Clara a small, leather-bound notebook. "Your mother gave this to me a few weeks ago. Said it was for you, in case anything ever happened." Clara's heart skipped. She thanked Mrs. Ellis and closed the door, her fingers trembling as she opened the notebook. Her mother's familiar handwriting filled the Pajasa journal, not of daily events, but of letters addressed to Clara. Each one was dated, stretching back years. "My darling Clara," the first one began, "you are stronger than you know." The letters spoke of love, of lessons, of dreams her mother had for her. But one entry, written just a month before the crash, stopped Clara cold. "Clara, my sweet girl, I see the way David looks at you, sometimes like you're a puzzle he can't solve. I worry he doesn't see your light. Promise me you'll never let anyone dim it. You deserve a love that lifts you up, not one that pulls you down." Clara's tears fell onto the page, blurring the ink. Her mother had seen David's detachment, his subtle cruelty, long before Clara had. The realization was a twist of a knife, but it also sparked something new. Clarity. She wasn't just grieving her parents. She was grieving the life she'd built with a man who couldn't share her pain. The next morning, Clara confronted David. He was in the kitchen, sipping coffee, scrolling through his phone. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. He barely looked up. About what? Your parents again? Clara, it's time to move on. Move on. Her voice cracked, but she pressed forward. You call them a burden. My parents. The people who loved me, who loved us. How could you say that? David sighed, setting his phone down. Look, Clara, they were needy. Always calling, always wanting your attention. It was exhausting. I just said what we were both thinking. No, she said, her voice rising. You don't get to rewrite this. You don't get to decide how I grieve. She paused, her mother's words echoing in her mind. And you don't get to decide my worth. David's face hardened. You're being dramatic. This is why I didn't want to deal with this. You're too emotional, Clara. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Clara saw him clearly, now not the man she'd married, but a stranger who'd hidden behind charm and empty promises. She thought of her parents, their warmth, their unwavering belief in her. They'd raised her to stand tall, to fight for herself. And in that moment, she knew she couldn't stay. I'm done, she said quietly. I deserve better than this. David laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. Good luck out there, Clara. You'll come crawling back. But she didn't. Over the next weeks, Clara packed her things and moved into her parents' house. It wasn't easy. Every corner held memories that stung, but it also felt like coming home. She found solace in small acts, tending her father's garden, cooking her mother's recipes, reading the journal again and again. Each letter was a reminder of her strength, a lifeline pulling her back to herself. One afternoon, while clearing out the attic, Clara found an old wooden box. Inside was a collection of letters not her mother's, but her father's, written to her mother during their early years. They were love letters, filled with poetry and promises, each one a testament to a bond that had weathered every storm. Clara read them through tears, her heart aching but also healing. Her parents' love hadn't just been for each other, it had been for her, too, a legacy of courage and devotion. The twist came unexpectedly when Mrs. Ellis visited again, this time with a confession. Your parents weren't just my neighbors, she said, her voice soft. They were my family, not by blood, but by choice. They helped me through my darkest days after my husband passed. I never told you because, well, I thought you had enough on your plate. Clara's eyes widened. Mrs. Ellis went on, describing how her parents had quietly supported her bringing meals, fixing her leaky roof, listening when she needed to talk. It was a side of them Clara hadn't fully known, a reminder of their boundless kindness. It shifted her grief, adding a layer of pride to her pain. Her parents hadn't just been hers, they'd been a light for others, too. Months later, Clara stood in the garden, the first blooms of spring pushing through the soil. She was alone, but not lonely. She'd filed for divorce, a decision that felt like shedding a heavy coat. David had fought it, then faded away, his absence a relief. Clara didn't need him to see her worth, she saw it herself now, reflected in her parents' words, their love, their legacy. As the sun set, Clara looked at the house, its windows glowing warmly. She thought of her mother's letters, her father's poems, Mrs. Ellis's stories. Loss had broken her, but it had also rebuilt her, stronger, clearer, free. She wasn't just surviving, she was living, carrying her parents' light forward. And in that quiet moment, she knew no one could dim it again.